Hello, it's Wednesday again, week 2 of our new book for book study. This one was a lengthy chapter. I think it's like 20 pages long. So I only narrowed it down to like 5 pages of notes, and I'm very proud of myself for that because this chapter is so good. It gives so many good principles for applying to our life and changing our opinions and changing our thoughts with rejection and failure and how we look at those things and how they affect our lives. And I think it's something that sometimes we don't realize, that we have that like negative relationship with failure and rejection. And then like I was going through this book and I'm like, wow, I think I do. Like most of the time I don't care what people think. Like I'm like, you know what? It's their fault. It's their opinion. It's on them, whatever it is that they think. But then I was reading through this, and there are times in my life, there are areas in my life where I'm like, I really did like value and put merit to whatever they were saying. And so the title of this is What's Your Relationship with Rejection? So she starts out and she says, what would you do in your life if you had absolutely zero fear of rejection or failure? Then she gives this quote from Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan says, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed. And I thought that is so good that he says that, because everyone knows the name Michael Jordan. They know he's a basketball player. They know that he's very skilled in what he does, and people look up to him. And he says, like, I failed. He puts it right out there, like, I failed. And he says, but if I never tried, I would have failed anyway. And so he says, I succeed because I failed. I've made myself better. And so I thought that quote was just so good. So she starts the chapter with that, and that is just like the very tippy top of the iceberg. It gets so much deeper and so much better from there. So moving on, she says, many of my most painful rejections have come from the voice inside my own head, telling me I'm not enough and I don't have what it takes. I had to change my relationship with rejection, or had I not changed my relationship with rejection and failure, I never could have mustered the courage to get back up every time I was knocked down. And I think that's so true. A lot of times we get in our own head and we think people are going to think this of me, or they're going to have this opinion of me, or they're going to cast me out and throw me aside, and I'm not going to have friends. My family's going to betray me. They're going to all leave me. I'm going to have nobody. And it's all just negative thoughts in our head that we allow to take over and to run our life. And we have to learn to just move past those and look and say, you know what, that's not true. How many times does that happen in our life? And yes, it does happen. People's family do reject them, do cast them aside. Friends do leave you or abandon you. It does happen. But of all the people in your life, how many times has it actually happened? And I think that's important to look at and get those negative thoughts and bring them out in the open and get them out of our head and push them aside and say, you know what, that's just fear talking. So she goes on page 42 to say, fear of rejection and failure are two of the biggest reasons people hold back, stay stuck, and don't pursue their dreams. Fear and rejection often carry negative feelings with them because we choose to let them. It's a choice. We are making that choice to say, I'm going to listen to fear and my fear of rejection over doing what I think I know that I'm supposed to do. And that's just something we have to choose to get over and say, you know what, that fear and rejection is real and it's hard, but I'm going to choose to look at all the benefits that doing this thing that I want to do is worthy of. So she says, everything in life simply carries the meaning we attach to it. So this is where she starts to give us the idea of attaching meanings to fear and rejection, and like what drives us, like what are our thought processes when we have faced fear and rejection, and how does it affect us? In the last book study, I talked about like what you focus on multiplies, and I think that's a really good principle that carries through here as well. So it carries the meaning we attach to it. So what you focus on multiplies. If you're focusing on the negative and you're focusing on all the things that possibly could go wrong, then that's always what you're going to be focused on. If you focus on all of the positive of, conquering your goals and dreams and pursuing those passions that you have, then you're always going to see the positive side of things. Like, well, you know what? That friend doesn't really like me anymore. Or that friend thinks I'm annoying, or that friend thinks I'm salesy, or whatever it is. Like, then you're going to be afraid to keep moving forward. But if you say, but look at, like, I've reached like 50, 60, 70, hundreds of people by pursuing this dream and this passion of mine. And so it's worthy of me continuing to go down that path, because look who I'm helping. Yes, I lost some people along the way, but I've helped so many more. And so keeping that mindset is really big. She talks about Sarah Blakely, which, if you know that name, she's the founder of Spanx. She's also most recently been like on Shark Tank, so it's kind of cool to see her name in this book, but she's friends with the author. And Sarah Blakely says that as she grew up, her dad, as they sat down at the dinner table, would ask them to name one failure that they faced throughout the day. And so you'd go around the table and each one had to share that failure. And so the author says the failure was honored as important because it meant they weren't afraid to take risks. So she's like, no wonder Sarah Blakely got so far so fast in her career. She faced so many failures and so many setbacks, and yet she pursued. And she said, no wonder why she was so successful, because she's not afraid to take the risk. She's not afraid to put herself out there. So then she dives into the 4 steps for changing your relationship with rejection. So all 4 of them, reveal, redefine, revisit, reframe, and revel. And so we're going to take each one at a time and break them down. I cut out so much, so if you haven't gotten this book, it's worthy. It looks like this. It's by Jamie Kern Lima. So go ahead and pick it up. This book is packed with so much good stuff, and I just took out the little bits that I could fit in this little book study. So the first one is reveal. The first step to changing your relationship with rejection is reveal. On page 49, it says, identify your current default definition or definitions you give to rejection and failure when it happens, or the ones you use to talk yourself out of even trying. The ones about, my family's gonna, cast me aside, or my friends are gonna think I'm, this horrible person, or my friends aren't gonna agree with me. Cast them aside. Forget about them. This is where you're gonna change your mindset on rejection and failure. It says, what is the first thing you think of when someone rejects you? You try and fail, or you don't try at all because of fear. Whatever that first thing that pops into your head is, that is going to be your definition of rejection and failure. And so once you have that identity of your definition for rejection and failure, then we're going to move on to change it. And we're going to show you, she walks through, how do you change that mindset? So she says to look back at past scenarios and situations and then write out all the thoughts and feelings that come with that part, that identity that you have given to failure and rejection. And then on page 50, she says, as human beings, we are wired to avoid pain at all costs. When we feel not enough or unworthy or unlovable, we feel massive amounts of pain. We mentally link all of this pain to rejection and failure, which makes us reluctant to take risks. We choose to stay stuck and play life small. So because we are wired to not want to feel pain, when there's a hot stove, you're wired as a kid, don't touch it, it's hot. That's the same thing with fear and rejection. She's saying, we're wired that way. When we know we're going to face fear and rejection, then we just tend to not do it because we're like, I don't want everything that comes with it. And she's saying, that's how we stay stuck. We play it small because we're afraid of those things. Instead of just redefining it, a lot of times people don't know that you can just redefine and change your identity of fear and rejection and move past that so you can be the best person that you are made to be. So it says, we can undecide that rejection and failure are negative and cause feelings of pain. This leads to step 2. So now we get into step 2, which is redefine. We create new, empowering definitions for rejection and failure. Remember, we have the ability to choose the definitions we attach to rejection. and failure. And when we attach positive definitions, fear goes away. That's what she says on page 51. So when we take rejection personally, it not only causes you great pain, it also complicates your relationship with the person who delivered the rejection. When I read this, I wrote right in the little margin here, the first time I read it, and I put, our decisions don't only impact us. And I think that's important to realize here because, she's saying it complicates your relationships with the person who delivered the rejection. And then she goes on to talk about how your work environment can cause tension there, and it can be hard on different aspects of your life. But it's important to remember our decisions don't only impact us. There's not just it's not just a small little bubble. When you make a decision, if you're married, your spouse is going to be affected, and your children are going to be affected, and your best friends and your parents and your grandparents. One small decision just impacts everybody. And so you have to keep that in mind, that your decision to not be obedient to your calling, to your dream, the things that God had put on your heart to pursue, it's not just impacting you. There's a whole trail of people that are going to be impacted by that as well. Okay, so the author follows up rejections for her company. So she is the founder of It Cosmetics. So if you're familiar with that, I use their face wash, and actually my husband really loves it too. So that's why we continue buying it. But we both really like it. But she's the founder and creator of It Cosmetics. So she said when she was starting her company, she would follow up rejection. So she would go into a meeting and she would see people and she would talk to them about her products and, hey, can I put my product in your store? Here's what it does. And she'd get rejected time and time again. And so she would follow up the rejection with an excited email, thanking them for their time and expressing excitement that one day when we are in their store, our products would be such an amazing value to them and their customers. And she said I didn't phrase it if we ever get in your store. She phrased it as when we get in your store, one day when we do. And so on page 52, she says some of the authors, she gives a list of go-to definitions that she assigns to rejection. So the first one is rejection is God's protection. So when you are faced with rejection, when somebody rejects you, in this case, when the owners of these stores looked at her and said, your product's not going to be a good fit for us, she looks at it and says, rejection is God's protection. So it's not now. It's not a good time now, but it doesn't mean that it's not in the future. And maybe it will never be in their store in the future, but it's because God's protecting me from whatever is going to happen in the future that I don't know about. And so I put, God opens and closes doors for a reason. He always has our best interest in mind. The second definition she gives is, it's a kind of spin-off of the first one, but she says that you weren't rejected. I hid your value from them. And so she puts herself in the position where she's talking to God and she's praying and she's like, God, I don't understand this rejection. I don't understand this failure, this setback. And then she says, I picture God, leaning over me and saying, you weren't rejected. I hid your value from them because they're not assigned to your destiny. And I think that's really empowering. To think about that, our Heavenly Father is there. He cares about us. Every single decision that we make, He knows, and He's with us every step of the way. And yes, it's hard to face rejection and failure. But if we have that, He's hiding our value. We are so valuable to Him. Everyone is valuable to Him. And He's created us on purpose, for a purpose. And so if He's hiding our value from somebody, we have to realize it's for our own good. The third definition that she reassigns for rejection and failure is rejection is a reminder that you're one of the brave ones. Again, going back to Michael Jordan's quote and how he said, I failed over and over and over again, and that's why I'm successful. So it's just a reminder that you're one of the brave ones. You're one of the ones willing to pursue and go after big dreams and big goals and end up failing along the way, but you're still going after them. Some people never try. On page 55, she says, every single person who has ever been brave enough to go after a dream has faced countless rejections and failures. They're just the brave ones willing to keep going anyway. So in the last book study 5 things successful people do before 8 a.m. The author tells the story of the owner of Macy's. And so if you aren't familiar with that, basically he opened a store in like 3 different locations and every single one of them failed. And then finally he, put his store, I can't remember what city it was, like Philadelphia or something. He opened a store there and it was finally successful. And then he started franchising into other places, and now Macy's is like a household store name. Like everyone knows of Macy's, they identify it with a big red star, and everyone just knows about it. But if he would have stopped after that first, second, or third failure, he would have never had the success that he had. And the same thing with the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. When he first started it, his goal was to have this big parade and then get people to come into the store and shop. And I don't think it was always for Thanksgiving, because they said it was super hot, and so like people would just come to the parade and they'd leave early, or they just go home right after because they were hot and sweaty and hungry and thirsty, and so they didn't want to shop. And he's like, my whole like thought process is like, wow, this is going to be a huge sales day for me, having this big parade outside my store, and nobody came in and shopped. But he didn't stop, and now everyone knows about the Thanksgiving Day Parade and Macy's sponsoring it. So don't stop because you face failure and rejection, because look at him. He could have stopped so many times and he didn't. He kept going. And there's so many other stories of, billionaires or successful people that we know their names that have failed along the way. On page 56, she says, the victory isn't in the outcome. It's in being one of the brave ones, taking the chance. And I put this little quote in here, and I can't find where I read it. I spent way too long last night deep diving into like all of my social media, all of Google. I can't find this quote, but it said something along the lines of, success isn't what you accomplish, but what you become along the way. And that's not the exact phrasing of it, but it's along those lines. And I thought that was so good to just kind of reiterate that, who you become along the way, how you grow and learn, and who you become, that's really the most important part. Yes, it's going to feel really, really good when you set a goal and you achieve it, but that's not your end game. You have to continue keep setting goals and like new things that you're reaching towards. You don't want to just become stagnant in your life. You want to continue to grow. So then on page 56, she says, the people who succeed the most are often the same people who fail the most, because they're the ones who try the most. And she gives 3 more definitions or meanings for rejection here. Rejection is redirection. It's happening for me, not to me. Prayers of, and then she gives the illustration of like, saying prayers of gratitude or thankfulness for the rejection, because it's preparing her for future success. And so all of those go along with the other 3 that she mentioned. And she said there's so many more that you can come up with. She's like, whatever definition you set your failure or rejection, that definition, it has to feel right to you. So if you're not a religious person, then don't maybe like go with, rejection is God's protection, because you won't 100% believe it. Or, saying prayers of thankfulness and gratitude for that rejection and what it's preparing you for. If you can't stand behind it, then don't set that as your definition. But really